Eric, can you hear us? Can you check that they can hear us? In the meantime, I would like to welcome you already to the session under the sub-theme 3, the green pathways to growth and sustainability. For the session 3, so it's the third session under that sub-theme, with the title Innovation in the Forest Sector, New Path to Growth and Sustainability. My name is Sven Walter from FAO, and the session is organized by FAO, by the College of Forestry at Oregon State University, and the World Agroforestry Center. Now, the moderator of the session is Eric Hansen from the Wood Science Engineering College of Forestry at the Oregon State University, and I hope he can hear us now, because otherwise there would have been a problem, but it works. So, Eric, I will stop here for the time being, and I will hand over to you in order to introduce our friends from the panel, and I wish all of us an exciting session. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Sven. Hello and welcome to all of those of you on site in Korea, as well as those of you online. I'm Eric Hansen, a professor of forest products marketing at Oregon State University, coming to you from Western Oregon in the United States, where it's just a bit past midnight. So if you're with me in one of these time zones, good morning, otherwise good afternoon or good evening. I have been involved with innovation-focused research for more or less the past 20 years. My connection to this event originates with Lyndall Bull of FAO. She and I have been working together on innovation research and outreach for many years. The other primary organizer of this session is Ashley Steele, also of FAO, that you'll see on the screen here. She has invested countless hours formulating and, because of COVID, reformulating the program, recruiting speakers, and gathering materials. Ashley is now in Sicily, working behind the scenes, caring for even the minutest of details. We're basically at her, we are at her mercy because she's the one controlling the slide deck. Finally, we have Clara Quiros Mauricio, also of FAO, who's assisting Ashley and helping to herd this moderator and the rest of the speakers. For those of you out there that are celebrating Eid Mubarak, let's now move to some housekeeping details. If you want to follow or post on social media, we're using hashtag Forest Innovation, all spelled out. This is being recorded, so please keep that in mind. Your microphone and camera will be turned off during the whole duration. We suggest that you view things side by side and that you use the chat to post questions for panelists, or if there's technical issues, direct those directly to Clara and she can help with those. With respect to the agenda, I am not going to go through this line by line because it's important that we stay on time, and I'm setting the precedent. If I'm not on time, then the rest of the people don't have to stay on time. I will be introducing each of these people right before they speak, so we will see each of them and get a short introduction. And again, if you have questions for any of the people, including the ones that are going to be on video presentations, they are likely with us so that you can also pose questions for them. All right, so with respect to the discussion themes, there were 3 discussion themes for this session. What are the key challenges and opportunities in using wood and wood fiber as a renewable material to replace non-renewable raw materials? Identification of synergies between innovation or in products or technology and social innovation, including finance to develop sustainable markets and a circular economy, and what data exists and what data are needed to support innovation and sustainable economic development. So in the next slide, I've given you an example of one of the challenges that exists out there. This is a report from the Mass Timber Coalition in the US. And the red annotation was made by the Vice President for Sustainability of the National Ready Mixed Concrete Association in the US. There's multiple pages of this and sometimes some very sarcastic comments coming from them. So you can see that other sectors are not going to just lie down and let wood take over the world. They're going to be fighting back, and that's definitely going to be a challenge. Now, with respect to this concept called innovation, I want to make sure that we're coming at this from sort of a common foundation. In my experience in asking industry members and students to define innovation for me, there's a very typical sort of one-dimensional answer that has to do with new products and not nearly as broad as what the concept really is. So now if we look at a definition from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, it says an innovation is the implementation of a new or significantly improved product or process, a new marketing method, or a new organizational method in business practices, workplace organization, or external relations. So you can see that this is a fairly all-encompassing sort of definition. I like to keep things much simpler in my work, and so when we're working with innovation at OSU, we refer to innovation as new products, processes, or business systems. Now, with respect to the innovation landscape, I just put together a bunch of words here for you to get an idea of how broad this topic is and how there are very different approaches to studying innovation as well. So if we look at the top left, we can think of something that's the very traditional topic of research and development, all the way to some of these new topics like bioeconomy and open innovation. And what I've done with these ovals, these orange ovals, is try to give you an idea of what I anticipate that we'll be hearing about through the various presentations today. So we're definitely not going to be seeing each and every of these topics during the next hour and a half. Next slide, please. I'm not particularly familiar with social innovation, and I thought maybe that could be the case for others. So I wanted to include this definition for all of you. Social innovation being the innovative activities and services that are motivated by the goal of meeting a social need and that are predominantly developed and diffused through organizations whose primary purposes are social. So you could think of things way back like trade unions and maybe even something like Wikipedia as examples of classic social innovations. Now, when it comes to kind of the human perspective on what innovation is and the direction it goes, I am very much a technocentric kind of a person. And what that means in practice is that I feel like that when problems like climate change become big enough, that human ingenuity and creativity will create the innovations that are needed and that will either significantly mitigate the problems or maybe even solve them altogether. But I think it's very important that we recognize that others in the world see the world very differently, and instead of seeing technology as the solution, they really see technology as the problem. And so this is more the ecocentric viewpoint. And if we didn't have the technologies that we have, then we wouldn't necessarily be pushing so much CO2 out into the atmosphere, for example. So just keeping in mind that there are definitely different perspectives here, but I feel like that overall our speakers are somewhere closer to the left end of this continuum than the right end. And I'll leave the ultimate judgment up to you as we go. Now, what's going on in the literature with respect to innovation? There has been a ton of work done in recent years. This is a recent systematic literature review, and you can see the trend in recent years and increasing looks at that and the basically what's being studied with respect to innovation. And so with this research, and I can say that most of the work that I've done has been focused on companies. And so if we move to the next slide, then we can start to think about what is the characteristic of the industry. So this is primarily from a couple of recent studies, these quotes. Even the most current work continues to describe forest sector firms using terms such as traditional, mature, and low-cost focused. Global competition pressures seem to capture the attention of firms and policymakers more than emerging opportunities. And as a mature sector, forestry and the forest industry alike tend to focus more on process rather than product innovation. And then a couple of quotes from some of my research that's from quite a while ago, but it still illustrates the point. The next two quotes on the next slide are from a manager in North America and then a manager in Europe. Manager in North America, this culture is incredibly conservative in this industry, so very resistant to change. And then from Europe, I think this whole innovation thing, or being innovative or not, is something that people consider a bit apart from their everyday work or everyday duties. And this is, of course, not the idea. So the unfortunate reality is that in the past decades, many forest sector firms have disinvested in research and development, and over time it also means a loss in capabilities and the personnel that can really understand the science and interact with R&D providers. The times are changing. Climate change, things like the bioeconomy or the circular bioeconomy are driving innovation within the sector. And I can definitely say that in the 30 plus years of my academic career, where we are today is the most exciting time with respect to innovation and new product development that I have ever seen. So with that, I want to transition to our first speaker because I know that he's going to talk specifically about some of these new products that are coming out of the forest sector. Our first speaker is Duncan Mays. These days, Duncan is a private consultant in renewable sustainable materials innovation. He serves as an expert and a chairman of the Council of Experts for the InnoRenew Center of Excellence in Slovenia. Previously, he was an executive with Timberlink Australia and New Zealand and vice president of Stora Enso. Duncan?
Great, and it's a great honor to be here, and greetings from sunny Helsinki today. Eric, you talked about innovation, and today I'm going to present a few examples of both product innovations, but then also some business model related innovations. One of the first really great innovations that I'm going to talk about is mass timber, which is on the next slide, please. So mass timber, generation one, as I call it, has seen a phenomenal growth over the last couple of decades. It's really grown from Central Europe, where it first originated from as a replacement to concrete and stone buildings, to being a global product with in excess of 2 million cubic meters of production annually around the globe. That equates to about 1 million tons of CLT. Obviously, glulam post and beam construction has been around for centuries, and so there's a long history and experience of constructing with glulam post and beam, especially in countries like Japan, where dealing with seismic activities, wood has a very strong position to play. Obviously, wood also has an excellent superior carbon footprint to competing materials like concrete and steel. But then when we look at it in terms of having an impact in terms of environmental global greenhouse gas emissions reductions, etc. So the challenge is huge. Concrete is consuming about 51 billion tons per annum in the construction sector. We have issues about where do we get all the sawn lumber from to produce these CLT, cross-laminated timber and glulam products, considering the availability of raw materials. We also then have to question the topic of material utilization rates between different building technologies and systems. If you take example, a typical 3 meter high by 12 meter long wall frame produced of cross-laminated timber versus a light frame timber construction, then the cross-laminated timber consumes 4 to 5 times more material than conventional light frame construction. So we have to also take account of material utilization very carefully in the next generations of products that we develop. The other key point is business models in mass construction. There's a huge shift and a huge step change for base material commodity producers like sawmillers to go into project-based business models. And this has been deterring a number of the larger companies from entering this, but those that have succeeded are making a really good business. And we're seeing very tall timber towers popping up all over the world. Next slide, please. So when we talk about next generation, I talk about new hybrids and advanced wood building systems. And these new hybrids and advanced building systems need to address this issue of material utilization rates. So we have an excellent material in wood, we have an excellent weight to strength ratio, but the principle needs to be use that material where it's needed and use that strength where it's needed. There's a number of emerging technologies which are coming into the frame now, such as the very innovative technology developed in Austria from the company Kielsteg, who developed an open web system which combines structural lumber together with a sheet material like OSB or plywood to make an open web system which provides an alternative to mass timber construction. Other examples where we can utilize, for example, faster growing, quicker rotation tree species, such as a number of eucalypts and faster growing pines, could be used in strand-based products, such as the one developed in Australia by Lignor, which is a cross-laminated strand lumber. This enables to use, instead of large saw logs, logs which traditionally will be going to the pulp industry, or, for example, unfortunately being used for energy today. Other end uses which can be combined with this open system technologies is natural fiber insulation, and we're starting to see a significant advancement in this sector. Next slide, please. Then the next area that I want to talk about is how the forest industry transits into the circular economy and away from conventional traditional linear economies. Obviously, most of our raw materials and also our operations are located remotely, a long way from the large cities. However, the large cities are where 70% of renewable materials are consumed today, and they generate 50% or more of the waste in the environment. And then at the same time, they also generate over 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So the forest industry has an experience in this from the recycling of newsprint and magazine print. Obviously, digital media has replaced newspaper and the likes, but we have already experienced within the industry to start to build new ecosystems related to recycling of wood-based products. Some other emerging concepts or approaches in the construction sector is that the architects are now starting to design for reuse and design for disassembly. So when they design buildings, they consider the whole of life of the building and how it can potentially be disassembled and then the components reused in new buildings. So there's some good opportunities, but a lot of work still to go. Next slide, please. So if we talk about a couple of interesting technologies which are enabling mobilization of this waste wood-based materials, there's a couple of interesting technologies I thought I'd talk about today. One, which is a technology which has been developed in the UK to recycle medium density fiberboard. Medium density fiberboard is a problem waste. It uses glues such as urea formaldehyde, which creates very strong bonds and links between the fiber and the glue, and this makes the breakdown of this material quite challenging. This technology, using special ohmic heating processes, enables those fibers to be broken back down into individual fibers and then either reintroduced into new MDF or into insulation products. Another technology is Licella, which is to use hydrothermal liquefaction technology to convert biomass to biocrude. Next slide, please. We sit with an abundance of natural polymers. So we have the world's biggest volume of natural polymers. Global polyolefin production is about 150 million tons. Kraft pulp global production is 200 million tons. So the forest industry is in a good position to challenge and replace fossil-based materials. Next slide, please. And summing up, some other really interesting, exciting end uses for these natural polymers, which we can extract from the wood, are things like, for example, carbonized lignin, which can be converted then into mass energy storage and batteries, for example, to replace conventional lithium batteries, utilization of microfibrillated cellulose, even into end uses like food and pharma industries, and even then textiles, woven textiles, and carbon fiber from lignin and cellulose. In addition, bio-based barriers based on cellulose and lignin are emerging. So in summary, we have a lot of great innovation and technology going on, still a lot of work to focus on integrating into the circular economy, and also we need to look at ways of using less materials but achieving greater outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. I think that 7 minutes is a bit mission impossible, but thank you for doing your best there. All right, our next speaker is actually a video coming from Olajide Joseph Alaba. He is chairman of Black Camel Energy Limited, a furniture components exporting company in Nigeria. He's the organizer of the first national forestry stakeholders meeting towards sustainable forest management in Nigeria and co-founder of the Forest Products Traceability Network. Ashley?
My name is Olajide Joseph Alaba, Managing Director for Black Camel Energy Limited, and the co-founder of the Forest Product Traceability Network. Today I'll be speaking on illegal logging and trade of illegally derived forest, Africa and the sustainable market. The first slide. Illegal logging is considered a huge problem in Nigeria and Africa at large. Nigeria is being ranked as a high-risk nation due to unregulated forest practices. This paper takes a cursory look at the trend of illegal logging in Nigeria and illustrates its implication on sustainable marketing of forest-derived products. We need to talk about illegal logging in the country and how we can curb it and how the West can look towards Africa and buy directly from Nigeria and be assured of legitimately harvested timber. Now to the second slide, weak data acquisition and management. We all know that due to lack of enforcement, due to lack of good forestry policies, there definitely going to be weak data collection and poor sustainable forest management. So data paucity tends to create a huge problem, resulting in lack of efficient forest auditing and monitoring. This is further compounded by a weak enforcement of policies coupled with unbiting corruption. Let's move to the fifth slide. Illegal logging decreases. Illegal logging thrives because there is huge market for illegally harvested timber. There are many countries which delight in importing and accepting logs irrespective of the source. This country accepts illegal timber. They are the largest buyer of illegal logs. And the funniest thing is they buy in droves. You know, most Asian countries, I'm sorry to say India, Vietnam, China, they all buy illegal logs. Not helping Africa, because most African countries, especially Nigeria, would have loved, to be on there, to be able to control their markets. But, lack of poverty and the rest, lack of capital, poverty, lack of forest management, inflates illegal logging activities. So move to the next slide. Complicity of the West in fueling deforestation in Africa. Yeah. The Western countries are also indirectly fueling deforestation in Africa, with Nigeria not an exception. The West always claims that they don't want to buy directly from most African countries due to forest malpractices. However, they buy from China, Vietnam, India, and a few others. Interestingly, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Indians buy from Africa. They buy illegal logs. Most of them delight in buying illegal logs. So they buy directly from Africa. They greenwash them and sell to the West. So who is indirectly fueling deforestation here? Who is indirectly fueling deforestation here? Move to the next slide. Nigeria efforts at sustainable forest management. Yeah, Nigeria, with the help of Dr. Uri Chendi, the CEO of Global Traceability System in Germany, has batted an agency called Forest Product Traceability Network. After numerous talks with both government and non-government organizations, this agency will submit to the guidance of the Federal Department of Forestry. The agency will also complement the effort of the department, which is now working on a national timber legality standard that should clearly define timber legality and completely phase out illegality in the timber sector. This will make Nigeria timber legal, boost sustainable forest management, makes net zero feasible, and makes the product globally acceptable. So no need of the West buying greenwashed product from Asia. Buy directly from Nigeria. Talk with us, talk with the agency. We can assure you legal timber from traceable source in Nigeria. Let's move to the next slide. Pragmatic in theoretical timber trade. The envisioned improvement in forest management practices should make the West look directly to Africa for our forest product needs. Buy timber products from Africa, and they can be rest assured of the traceability and its legality. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide. Improved data collection. Definitely, we know with this in place, there will be improved data collection, and there will be improved sustainable forest management, which the West always clamor for. And now Nigeria is ready, and now we are ready to do it. Let's move to the next slide, which is conclusion. Illegal logging is a act that shouldn't be practiced nor encouraged. We plead with all countries to front against forest products with no verified traceability, so as to help create a friendly atmosphere for all. We also call on the Western market to look more towards Africa, especially Nigeria, for our African exotic species, and deal directly with the country to help promote legal harvesting. We all know that tropical timber from Nigeria remains an exotic species that must be traded sustainably. Thank you for being with us, as we also acknowledge Dr. Ulrich Endi, who is the CEO, ETS Global Traceability Solutions in Germany, and Mr. Adedoye Oye Simon, who happens to be the secretary of EMADET, Equator Prize winner, Ibadan, Oyo State, Nigeria. Thank you very much. My name is still remain Olagide Joseph Alawa, Lakame Energy Limited. Thank you.
All right, our next presentation will actually be live and in the room. It's from Heidi Brock. Heidi is the president and CEO of the American Forest and Paper Association, often known as AF&PA. It's a group that advocates for the pulp, paper, packaging, and wood products manufacturing sectors. Together, these sectors represent $300 billion US dollars in sales and nearly 1 million employees. Heidi?
Thank you so much, Eric. I am so honored to participate in this World Forestry Congress and to join so many global leaders committed to building a more resilient future through our forests. The American Forest and Paper Association members operate at every stage of paper production, recovery, and recycling. Next slide, please. This includes sawmills and pulp and paper mills that produce raw materials for manufacturing, plants that use leftover materials from manufacturing, like when making carbon beneficial bioenergy, and conversion plants that turn paper into sustainable packaging products. As Duncan Mays was commenting earlier, our industry is circular by nature, and our products can be easily recycled. Today, I want to talk about how our industry is making strides in sustainability and innovation, and how our success is catalyzed through partnerships. Those represented here today clearly know what it means to be a sustainability leader. And on the next slide, you can see our track record of sustainability leadership and reporting. In 2011, our association launched an initiative called Better Practices, Better Planet 2020, making us one of the first manufacturing industries in the United States to establish quantifiable sustainability goals. In the first decade, we surpassed our safety goal. We surpassed our greenhouse gas emissions goal. We surpassed our purchased energy efficiency goal, and we achieved our wood fiber procurement goal. Now, today, we are continuing in the decade ahead with Better Practices, Better Planet 2030, Sustainable Products for a Sustainable Future. These goals include a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% and advancing more resilient forests by supporting conservation and restoration programs, engaging in partnerships, and investing in research and education, as well as promoting sustainable forest management. I want to underscore the fact that in addition to the exciting work underway in the forest itself, our industry's strength is also evident in innovative products, processes, and partnerships. Next, I want to spotlight some member innovation through our annual Better Practices, Better Planet Sustainability Award Program. These awards seen here recognize exemplary initiatives, and the first one comes from Green Bay Packaging. In the United States, 90% of the wood that is used to produce essential paper and wood products is sourced from private, sustainably managed forest land. Most of these lands are smallholders. Recently, Green Bay Packaging partnered with the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, the American Tree Farm Foundation, the American Forest Foundation, and the American Tree Farm System to advance the SFI Small Lands Group Module certification. This partnership adds value for family landowners. It increases certified sustainable forests while reducing barriers like costs. Green Bay Packaging also announced another innovative achievement. Their Wisconsin mill achieved net zero water certification. That means total gallons of reused and reclaimed water are more than the amount of new freshwater supply. The next example is from Georgia Pacific, which developed a paper-based mailer that is 100% recyclable and comes as e-commerce is on the rise. Paper padded mailers are made with renewable materials, recyclable, and result in recycled fibers that can be used again to make new products. We recently conducted a member mail survey and released new industry guidance in the United States to increase confidence for recycling of paper padded mailers. Our industry is also making major investments to continue the best use of recycled fiber. In fact, about $5 billion in manufacturing infrastructure investments by 2024 have been planned or announced in the United States. And the industry's recycling guidance I mentioned earlier includes guidance for pizza boxes. Our AF&PA mill survey confirmed that pizza boxes are recyclable at paper mills and that grease and cheese are not an issue. In this case, WestRock teamed up with industry partners to help clear up the confusion about pizza boxes, and the project connects to a public educational portal, helping to spread the word that pizza boxes are indeed recyclable. Since an estimated 3 billion pizzas are consumed in the United States each year, that's about 600,000 tons of potential fiber that could be recycled. The next slide shows that when we think about innovation, we must also think about the future generations of talent, and I am excited to say that the future is indeed very bright. With support from the International Council of Forest and Paper Associations represented here at this Congress, we celebrate the promise of emerging scientists with the Blue Sky Young Researchers Innovation Award. Last year, we honored these 3 individuals, each representing very unique talents, and their work shows exciting potential to help our industry innovate and, importantly, advance sustainability. And as we look at the impact we deliver through partnerships, let me comment on some additional ones. At AF&PA, our ongoing work with national and regional forest industry associations around the world is one way that we collaborate on sustainability. Again, through the International Council of Forest Product Associations, as well as the Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries, we work together on shared goals. Our sustainability work aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals like clean water, clean energy, economic growth, responsible consumption and production, and industry innovation and infrastructure. And finally, let me say that as we work collectively in partnership, we would really value continuing this conversation that we're having today. Please visit our website to learn more about how the U.S. industry's sustainability goals are being achieved, and sign up for our newsletter, AF&PA Delivered, to receive the latest news on our work. As evidenced by this successful and long-awaited World Forestry Congress, together in partnership, we are stronger in advancing a sustainable and resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you for staying really close on time. I appreciate it. Our next event here is a video from Sandra Regina Afonso. Sandra is a PhD researcher in the Brazilian Forest Service and collaborating professor at the postgraduate program in environment and rural development at the University of Brasilia since 2020. Her research focuses on non-timber forest products, forest bioeconomy, management and conservation of Brazilian savanna, and production chains. Ashley?
Is Sandra Afonso. It's a pleasure to be in this section. I will talk about no timber forest products as bioeconomy drivers in Brazilian forests. Brazil has the second largest area of forests in the world, with about 12% of the world's total forests, an area estimated at 500 million hectares. This corresponds to 59% of the country's total area. The country is home to a large part of the planet's biodiversity, hold more than 20% of the total number of species worldwide. Despite its high diversity in Brazil, no timber forest products account for only 35% of the total volume of products extracted from natural forests. This no timber extraction, although smaller than that of wood, has been increasing annually, and for traditional communities, it's of great social and economic importance. There are about 30 types of peoples and traditional communities recognized by public policies. They make the management of no timber products their way of life. However, expanding the potential benefits of no timber forest products depends on establishing a series of innovations along the value chain. As we look at this stage along the value chain, we see that the first one is extraction. According to the National Survey, Brazil generates about $400 million a year with the extraction of no timber forest products. Only 7 products are responsible for 94% of this amount. However, this figure is underestimated. Much of what is consumed and sold in the short trade circuits is not accounted for. It means we must find a way to better systematize information regarding the first stage of the value chain. In the processing stage, the second stage in the value chain, you have made many advances in development of new products, such as açaí, which represents almost half of the production value. A series of research has also been carried out to take advantage of all the different parts of different fruit, such as pequi and babaçu. There are also innovations related to social and organization within the value chain, such as the Amazon Nut Observatory, the OCA. The OCA is a network of organizations that works to develop the value chain for the Amazon nut, with the goal of improving the living conditions of producing communities and people. You can also talk about innovations brought by the third sector in partnerships with the government, such as the Conexus Social Environment Fund, an innovative financial instrument that aims to facilitate the access to credit by cooperatives. For the final stage of the no timber forest products value chain commercialization, Brazil has been building public policies since 2009. In 2009, the National Plan for Promotion of Social Biodiversity Products chain was established. It aims at strengthening chains and consolidating sustainable markets for no timber forest products. One of the plan's various actions is the inclusion of social biodiverse products in agricultural policies. Among them, the following stand out: policies for the acquisition of these products through public procurement, subsidies for products sold below production cost, and credit lines for the extraction and processing of no timber forest products. In addition, these policies and programs in 2019, with the growth of bioeconomy concept in the world, Brazil incorporated the term and created the Brazilian Bioeconomy Social Biodiversity Program. The program's objective is to promote the partnerships between public and private authorities. An example of this is the result of a public policy that requires companies to share the benefits received from the sale of final products with the production communities. This generates an arrangement between companies and communities to create funds used to finance projects to promote the sustainable use of our biodiversity. In summary, we observe that no timber forest products value chain can be promoters of the bioeconomy. However, some challenges still need to be overcome for this to happen in an inclusive and sustainable way. Thank you.
I should have mentioned that the videos that we're seeing today are all voluntary papers submitted to and accepted by the Congress. Next up is Jim Roshetko. Jim is with the World Agroforestry Center in Indonesia, and he is the lead of a huge project on innovative forest technologies in the Asia-Pacific region. His talk will address the context and findings of that project. Jim? You're muted.
Thank you. So that's just an example of innovative technology, making sure that your microphone's on. So thank you, Eric, as well as I want to thank the Congress and the organizers for in giving me the opportunity to present the results from our roadmap on innovative technologies and sustainable forestry in Asian Pacific region. So next slide. So a little bit of the background. So the during the third Asia Pacific Forest Sector Outlook Study, which was in 2019, it was identified that the uptake and scaling of innovative technologies in the forest sector was slow and uneven, and that this sort of presented a missed opportunity, let's say. Also in that year, there was the Forestry Week, which was held in South Korea. More than 300 students and young professionals attended, and they also emphasized this idea that the innovative technologies were sort of slow and uneven. And they also, everyone at the Forest Week said, yeah, there's a good opportunity for the youth in the sector to get involved in innovative technologies. Jumping on this opportunity, FAO and FTA, which is primarily C4 and CRAP for this activity, implemented the Asia Pacific Roadmap on innovative technologies in the forest sector. This was about 18 to 24 month process. The roadmap, the details of the roadmap will be presented Friday here at the Congress, I think at noon, just a little bit of a promotion. And there was also a very specific integrated role for the youth in implementation of the roadmap. So next slide. And you can see here that so it was a very involved process. There were surveys, interviews, online activities, inception workshop, as well as validation workshops. So over 425 people in the sector participated and contributed to the study. So we can say that it was quite thorough. Okay, next slide. So from the point of view of the roadmap, there were 4 categories of innovative technologies identified. So digital technologies, biological technologies, process and product technologies, finance, and social innovations. So you can see this covers very much a lot of the ideas that Eric mentioned early in his introduction. Next slide. So there's a sort of bullet list of what were sort of the more prioritized technologies that were identified. And I won't read that list, but basically we can sort of break them into 3 important topics. First one being satellite-based technologies for improving management, monitoring, and reporting. The second group, which was interesting, was maybe these sensor networks for acoustics, optical, and camera, which is very much focused on conservation. And then the other one, the ones at the bottom, is more the ICT links, ICT technologies to help link engagement of communities, so community forestry, but also the public in general, for them to provide information and also to get information. So crowdsourcing science, citizen science. Next slide. When we look at the biological technologies, the strong emphasis from the study was that on generating improved genetic resources in germplasm, so improved quality, improved quantities of priority species, but not just that, but also making sure that there's been a lot of advancements in these technologies in the last 10 to 15 years, and making sure these technologies are available to community forest groups, to individuals, to small scale, to small scale operators as well, so that the improved variety, improved germplasm can be produced by others and also utilized. Many times in the past, the high quality germplasm was actually something that was slowing up utilization because there wasn't enough supply. And the focus is also that commercial species should continue in this vein, but also locally prioritized species can be prioritized. There's also the biotech, for genetic modified, but also a big thing is DNA identification and tracking, mainly focused on monitoring and combating illegal activities. Next slide. So for process and product innovations, we can sort of think of it as breaking down into three broad areas. This is utilizing digital technologies for improved planning, management, and harvesting, which of course improves resource use efficiency. The second group is again focusing on improved processing at where the products are being produced. So 5G, NCN, artificial intelligence, again, very strongly focused on improving efficiency. And then maybe the last group, which was also mentioned by Duncan, and again, a strong focus on this, is engineered wood products. But just not the timbers.
We are risking you to lose.
But also bamboo, biochemicals, pharmaceuticals. So for the innovative finance and social innovation, next slide.
James, I think we are losing you.
Okay. Can't see that, but you're losing me? I can hear you guys. Okay, my screen is frozen, but I can see the small screen. So the innovative finance and social innovation breaks into two sort of group areas. The first one being finance, where blended finance is very important, being able to integrate private, government, and development finance. Of course, green, social, and climate bonds, crowdfunding, those types of things. So the finance side of things. But then the second side, again, which I mentioned earlier, is the community forestry side. So this is a social innovation, trying to provide more opportunities and benefit to society, which was mentioned slightly before, but also not just community forestry is actually not new. It's been around 50 years, but it's actually matured. A lot of governments actually don't see it as an enemy anymore, but something that can be used to improve rural communities, help protect the forest, et cetera. So focusing with the forest group users, community forest user groups, and utilizing ICT technologies that can help empower them to engage in enterprise, but also protect the forest as well. Next slide. So
We have about a minute left.
Okay, the roadmap study, we generated 10 evidence-based recommendations, and with 59 specific options based on conditions and priorities for governments or for local conditions. The next slide. The first 4 recommendations very much are focused on why do we harness the potential of the innovation technologies. And this is a big one is improved monitoring of forest resources and tracking illegal activities. Second one is being able to increase awareness and enhance participation of the community, of citizens. improving productivity and resource use efficiency, which has been touched on several times, generating new jobs and supporting livelihoods. Next slide. The next 6 are more about how to support the uptake and scaling. So how to facilitate the use of these new technologies. Key one is coordination across the sector, actors, and scale. This is more or less national level. Next one is investment in innovative research, extension, and capacity building. Next, developing conducive policies and regulations. Often a complaint is that policies and regulations lag behind and hinder the implementation of innovations. Next slide. Considering the economics of the innovation. So this is often called scaling down. So making sure that the innovative technologies are not restricted only to the big companies or big players, but also small scale operators, communities, et cetera. Number 9 is focused on being aware of the negative impacts of the innovative technologies and putting in place some social and environmental safeguards. Last one is strengthening regional coordination, which is basically number 5, but at the regional level. So international cooperation, people can share implementation. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I've started talking very loud. Last 3 products, last slide is we had 3 products. We had a youth volume, 13 papers from youth who are involved with innovative forestry and innovative technologies in forestry. We have a policy brief coming out and a working paper, which will, the policy brief, of course, will summarize, and the working paper will go into detail. Those should be out soon. Next slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope the link was good enough that you could hear me.
I think we got basically all of it. There was a little bit of glitchiness in there, but we got most of it. All right, thanks, Jim. Our next video is from Aurelio Padovezzi. Aurelio is a PhD candidate at the University of Padova in Italy, focusing on social innovations in forest and landscape restoration initiatives. His master's degree is in forest resources from his home country of Brazil and the University of Sao Paulo. Ashley?
Hi. The increasing recognition of natural benefits to people has making forest and landscape restoration gain momentum in the global forest policy. FLR has already mobilized thousands of people to action and billions of dollars to recover degraded landscapes, places where marginalized people is having no access to many innovations that improves our daily lives well-being. I'm Aurelio Padovezzi, a Brazilian who has been dedicated to restore degraded landscapes. Currently, I am a PhD student of the University of Padova, Italy, developing a research project named Uncover Social Innovation of Brazilian FLR Initiatives. The first step of this research was to bridge FLR and social innovation concepts. In the next few minutes, I will present the results in a theory of change mode that, for the first time, consider the role of social innovation in the FLR process. FLR actions on the ground means to keep and restore areas that provide key ecosystem services. It also means to enlarge multifunctional forests through timber and non-timber management, agroforestry, and regenerative agriculture, improving the quality of life and health of farmers, consumers, and many others living beings. Today, FLR is a goal in many international agreements, and several initiatives are being implemented in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Currently, dozens of countries are voluntarily committed to restore more than 107 million hectares under the Bond Challenge. And the next year starts the decade of ecosystem restoration, aiming to scale up restoration efforts all over the world. Although promising, FLR agenda has many challenges to overcome. The lessons learned from the past experiences have shown difficulties in adapting to the countless social, technological, political transformations in the last decade. The increasing interest in social innovation has to do with the fact that the world is currently jumping from one crisis to the next, and to the rising recognition that there is no silver bullet or superhero able to solve the wicked problems we are facing right now. Today's solutions are complex, varying from one context to another, and require many people engagement. The forest sector has great potential to foster employment, improve rural people well-being, and the landscape's resilience. Unfortunately, this potential has not been realized, especially in marginalized rural areas. Social innovation is a spark for something new that is collective design to find new ways of meeting social needs. Social innovation is a broad concept. It embraces from social enterprises to bottom-up participatory process. Regardless of the approach, civil society engagement, participation is essential. In general, there are 3 ways to characterize social innovation. First, it is something new to the landscape or to the people involved. Second, it is built by people, to people. Third, it changes stakeholders' relationship, their governance arrangement, or their attitudes. When in addition, it also aims to enhance natural contribution to people, it can also be named social ecological innovation. The conceptual bridge between FLR and social innovation is built on actors-centered institutional theory. Remembering that institutions are formed by rules and norms, which, in turn, are defined by groups of actors. The bridges were organized in the theory of change perspective, where an initial situation, a landscape experiencing an advanced ecological degradation process with a growing number of marginalized people, is transformed through a social, innovative, forest, and landscape restoration process, which we call SIFLR. So let's presenting the finding bridges. Bridge 1. Where can SIFLR occur? Both FLR and social innovation are transformation process triggered and shaped by the local context, possibilities, and interests. Therefore, SIFLR takes place at the local level. In its narrative is built by an intertwined set of evidences, traces of social memory, personal interests, collective values, perceptions of cause-effect, and the ability to persuade of those who want to transform. Bridge 2. Why does SIFLR happen? The search for a better quality of life is the trigger and one of the primary desired results of SIFLR. However, this only happens when local and regional actors adjust their attitudes and cooperate to generate multi-scale benefits. In other words, when the landscape assets improvement required by the local residents are articulated to the ecosystem services provision. Bridge 3. Who makes SIFLR happen? SIFLR is an endogenous process that is born locally and can spread throughout the landscape and region. However, SIFLR will only happen when landscape agents are organized, willing, and prepared to lead the transformation when a window of opportunity opens. Bridge organizations are quite important entities to facilitate these groups' connections with agents from other scales and sectors, acting as a political resources, acknowledgement brokers. Bridge 4. How does SIFLR happen? Many transformation processes began, but only those capable to generate a territorial governance system will have access to the resources and power necessary to put their vision of future in practice. SIFLR process is no different, and the main good governance features for it are ability to build trust, capacity to self-organize, flexibility and adaptability to changing context, the capacity of linking drillers to other sectors, social groups, and levels of governance. Bridge 5. What is the SIFLR impact? The impact desired by an SIFLR process is to establish a new social and power relations capable of sustaining the social ecological resilience of landscapes. However, as it involves several complex and dynamic mechanisms, paradoxically, resilience can only be conceived by a transformative process, a social learning continuously adapting to a changing context. In conclusion, we can say that SIFLR specifies a distinct and possible approach to FLR, which brings socio-ecological innovation as a driven and a desirable element for supporting sustainable livelihoods and restore socio-ecological relationship on the landscape. However, many pending questions remain to be answered. Responses to these questions can contribute to structure and conduct a more inclusive FLR. Thank you very much.
All right, we have a second video coming from Marcel Starfinger. Marcel is a research associate and doctoral candidate, chair of tropical and international forestry at the Technical University of Dresden. in Germany. A forester by training, he has mainly worked in the context of forest-based development cooperation for public and non-governmental institutions. Ashley.
Hello from the forestry city Tarrant in Germany. Which of these two things could a forest smallholder use as collateral for a loan more easily, a bike or a teak plantation? In most cases, the answer would probably be the bike. However, in some countries, there are growing opportunities, pun intended, to use plantations, trees, and the products and services derived from them as collateral for loans. I invite you to explore some of these mechanisms. Through our study, we aim to assess if tree collateral mechanisms are a key innovation for forest smallholders. And yes, for some approaches, there are literal price tags being put on trees. What exactly did we do? We performed a systematic literature review to find documented cases of trees being used as part of collateral arrangements for loans. We hope that our conceptualizations can contribute to streamlining the rather isolated debates going on about this topic. What exactly is tree collateral? Well, there's no simple answer, much rather a plethora of different approaches. Tree collateral is in no way a new approach. Some sources date back to the late 1960s. For example, timber loans in the United States or customary pledging of cocoa trees in Nigeria. Let's look at some other approaches from around the world, moving from the more conventional down to the less conventional approaches. In Paraguay, the assets of a company are used to secure a trust fund. This includes the trees and the plantations as collateral as well. In China, forest assets and forest use rights can be mortgaged by forest smallholders to obtain loans. This is the most developed and best documented case from around the world. In South Africa and many other countries, outgrower schemes are a key approach to financing smallholder forestry. In this case, the company holds a contractual lien on the future harvest of the forest smallholders. In return, they issue upfront payments to the smallholders for plantation establishment and management. In Thailand, there are two approaches. One relies on the stumpage value of the trees as an add-on to conventional land as collateral. A second approach also uses the stumpage value of the trees, but further relies on two joint debtors from a local village fund. This underlines the importance of local aggregations. In Lao PDR, plantation certificates with an inventory are key to provide credits from microcredits institutes. Similar approaches exist that rely on inventories, plantation management plans, and timber sales contracts. In India, annuity payments or annual dividends allow smallholders to reap the benefits of their plantations year by year prior to harvest, a nice dividend for the piggy bank. On the rather informal side, there are agreements between forest smallholders and local traders. The local traders issue advance payments and hold a lien on the future harvest of NTFPs like cocoa or nutmeg. So there's not just timber in the product basket, but also NTFPs. On the religious side, the Mudharaba profit-sharing arrangement links up smallholders with investors. Upon harvest, these two parties share the profits at a predetermined range. This makes it compatible with the principles of Islamic banking. On the conservation side, there are approaches that rely on the conservation status, restoration success, or expected carbon benefits. We can conclude that there is a plethora of different approaches, and sometimes it may be difficult to navigate this jungle. The question remains if tree collateral is a key innovation for forest smallholders. In my opinion, it could become a key innovation if the various other prerequisites are given and if the existing mechanisms are optimized. Many of the mechanisms remain in initial phases of rollout or have even been discontinued, others needing major improvement. maybe it shouldn't be that much more difficult to use a tree or plantation as collateral in comparison to a bike. I believe that the green underused assets of forest smallholders can play a vital role to support their business, if and only if tree collateral mechanisms are implemented carefully and securely. Thank you for your attention and for your support.
Our last speaker is Mokena Makeka. Mokena is a principal at Dahlberg Advisors. He's a South African architect, artist, creative, curator, global leader, scholar, speaker, and urbanist. In his work, he offers high-quality design and strategic insight, innovative design solutions, and mentorship across various disciplines. Mokena?
Thank you so much. Looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you about data. I come from a part of the world where 3/5 of humanity experience what I would describe as data inequality. In other words, there's not enough data about their living circumstances, their environment, their conditions. And this data inequality puts into question how do we create sustainable communities without access to these data points. So this presentation is essentially to give a bit of a backdrop about how we begin to engage in these contexts where there's an absence of full data sets, but also more importantly, how we can begin to reimagine ways to engage with communities and be able to fill in the gaps, if you will. Next slide. COP26 offered us an opportunity to look at what the future could be, particularly if you look at the amount of capital that's been set aside for forests, for development, etc. But the question has been, where does this capital go? How does it get deployed? And what does that mean for the future? Next slide. The future, I believe, is a combination of things. It's one where we begin to blur the distinction between forests and cities, where we begin to think very creatively about ecologies, and looking also at the question of agroforestry, production, the way we begin to imagine our environments. But in order for us to realize that vision as set outside by those images, but also by the capital that was declared last year, the question is, how do we make the right decisions about where to put this money? How do we mobilize resources on the ground? How do we activate ourselves in order to achieve something that approximates a more equitable planet? Next slide. I want to make the argument that in the absence of complete data sets, we have to be very critical about how we understand data, how we map landscapes, and the scales at which we begin to think that we imagine or can understand a particular context. For example, and you'll see the calculation on that side, that's one of my favorite calculations from physics, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which basically is a theory, or actually the fact that the more you measure something, the more it becomes unattainable, and the closer you get to something, the more it changes its properties. This is quite an interesting way of maybe understanding what we mean when we measure stuff from a data perspective. So at the macro sort of scale, when we zoom out and we look at the whole globe and we say, in this part of the world, this X amount of hectares available for greening, or this is the nature of river systems and so on. At that level of scale, we have to be very careful about the type of conclusions that we're drawing from those data sets. Those data sets give us the opportunity to make big, bold statements, but they don't give us granularity, they don't give us nuance, they don't give us deep sort of insights. And in fact, that type of data collection can often lead us to very problematic conclusions. At the middle level, which we would call the meso level, which would be national and so on, we find other sorts of constraints. This is where countries say, well, you can't do this for this reason. There's this legislation, there's this clause, etc. And that is the scale of when we're taking data at that particular point where very often constraints begin to emerge and imagination gets limited. But then there's also the micro level. And the micro level are the narratives, the human stories. When we begin to look at a landscape and understand that it's structured in that particular fashion, maybe because animals migrate across there twice a year and that's why agriculture works in a particular fashion. Maybe the landscape is in that particular way because the way the soils are structured, so that's how we can begin to understand the human settlement patterns. But beyond that, there's also understanding how do microbes and ecologies work. So when we talk about data sets, and particularly in the context of how do we respond to creating this new world, we have to remember that in some places we don't have access to equitable levels of data running from the micro, the meso, and the micro level. In fact, what we need is that diagonal line as demonstrated there, is that we actually need to toggle between these two conditions. And human narratives are often the intangible. So I make the case that very often, in order for us to do the work that we need to do, it's about storytelling. It's about getting narratives on the ground. It's about engaging with communities and allowing those data points to be as significant as your more traditional satellite data points. It's only between the balancing, if you will, between these three different conditions that we can begin to get to a point where we can say there's true data insights that become useful. And this is particularly important in context of the global south, where there's limited information, where there's data scarcity, where data is expensive, and there's not enough granularity in the way that we think is necessary to make a number of strategic decisions. And this can apply to infrastructure planning, this can apply to riparian management, this can apply to impact assessments and so on. The ability to ensure that when we map and understand data, we move across different scales. Next slide. Now, this slide is a graphic representation of what I refer to, the difference between data insights and pure data. Some people, and I've discussed this with colleagues, they would say to us, okay, Moekena, so you want to use mass timber for housing. How many houses, will you make? What is the cubic meterage? The obsession with absolute data, I think, actually gives us a false sense of comfort. The importance of data is to give us insights. And insights are about our ability to take abstract information and to be able to understand trajectory and patterns in direction. So very often when I'm working with governments on projects and they say, tell us a bit more about Congo, tell us a bit more about Gabon, where is this figure? I say, the important figure is to understand the trajectory of change, and that is the importance of the data set, not the absolute data. If we put ourselves in a condition where we're trying to find absolute data, we can spend years and years finding figures and points which are ultimately contested by a different form of research in a different methodology. And I also use this when I'm dealing with my teams, PhD researchers, et cetera, to say, use the data to produce insights, not to produce more data. Next slide. Now, forests can play a significant role in this. And when we think of the African forest in particular in the global south, tropical forests, there's big debates. Well, how much of this is intact? How much is not? Should there be new plantations? What about the mosaic landscapes? There's competing data sets about how much of Africa's forest landscapes are degraded or not. And I often make the point that again, let's understand, depending on the data set, how do we understand the micro-narratives? How do we work with the communities? But how do we advise governments to understand the trajectory of what's happening with regards to forests and not the absolute number? And in that case, it becomes a very powerful message for governments and organizations to invest and to enter with some degree of directionality, but understanding that it's an imperfect system that is consistently moving, as per Heisenberg. Next slide. Cooperation is critical to unlock these sorts of narratives, ranging from community to state to landscape, etc. And I use this point because sometimes data collection can be cold, and the people who deploy data say, well, that's what the data says, therefore you must do this. And I think it's very important to use data to balance out and inform decisions in human behavior, but data is not a god and should not be treated as such when we make decisions. If anything, it's really there to guide us and give us insight. Next slide. Our theory of change on how data collection works in these environments, and I'll move on this very, very quickly because I'm conscious of time, just really to say that it's about understanding a set of 5 pillars or so, which informs how we work towards 2030 and how we can take these data collection sets to work us towards real deep impact with regards to climate smart forest economies. So how do we begin to balance out what's happening with communities, understanding of landscape, indigenous environments, technologies, etc., and how do we work towards a substantive theory of change? Next slide. So data resolution for a sustainable world. Many people will say we need more and more accurate data and so on. I'm cautious about that for the reasons I've outlined. Of course we need more information. Of course we need more data. But data is not an end in itself. The important point is to get to a point where we have higher resolution of data points so that we can think about what does a sustainable world look like. Next slide. And biourbanism speaks to this whole question because there's certain components of systems that are difficult to measure. The importance of traditional values or access to different points in the landscape, the importance of animal migratory patterns on overall ecology, we will never find enough data sets to fully justify or fully comprehend the complexity of urban and natural systems. But as long as we put ourselves within a framework of this trajectory that I described, we can start to create bio-urban cities and effectively have more bioeconomic strategies for our countries as opposed to economic strategies which are divorced of landscape and development. Next slide. And I wanted to put this theory to practice by saying that we've been doing work for the last 2 years trying to understand what does a climate-smart forest economy look like and how do we begin to understand carbon and how do we measure things. When we talk about measuring carbon and carbon sinks within forests, there's a whole degree of complexity. Some forests are actually net producers of carbon because they're poorly managed. In other instances, we start to debate how much carbon is kept into the soil. The important thing was to get the scientists not to obsess about the accuracy of carbon within the sink, but to understand its trajectory. Likewise, within buildings, we can talk about how much carbon is sequestered within structures, how do we keep it in place and make sure that buildings can stand up to 60 or 70 years, replace concrete and steel for wood. Again, there are lots of inaccuracies in the current data sets, but there's enough comfort to give us directionality that this is the way to go forward. And the same applies with the sort of beneficiation opportunities that come with using wood with regards to furniture. So the overall message, we've actually created a sort of a 3S framework. We're hoping to release it in the next couple of months, make it publicly available. I know it will be contested either in terms of its methodology or outputs. The important thing to remember is that it's the first time there's a tool that exists that begins to give us some indication that you can track carbon from forests to furniture all the way into buildings and begin to make, excuse me, tactical decisions. Sorry, I needed some water. Anyway, begin to make tactical decisions about how carbon can be used to make a sustainable society. And I have 30 seconds left just to say that the overall message here is that we will increasingly find ourselves in a complex world with access to more data points, more complexity, and that we should not find ourselves consistently spinning in the pursuit of data for its own sake, but to understand how data can give us insights towards the creation of more equitable societies. And that, I believe, is the true objective of creating a sustainable ecosystem in which forests can play a big role. So I'm a big fan of being cautious about data and actually understanding the nuance of what does the data mean as opposed to what does the data say. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgana. We will now transition to a short panel discussion led by Sven Walter. I know that he was introduced earlier, but just to follow protocol, Sven is a senior forestry officer for FAO, and he leads the sustainable products team in the forestry division. He's a geographer whose career has included work with the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification and extensive time in various roles with FAO. Sven?
Thank you very much, Eric. And please, from the technicians, put our speakers, our panelists back on the screen. It's a hybrid meeting, so you never know how long the internet will last. So I'm happy that we made it through until the end, and they will following up now here. They are with us for the 10 minutes of discussion. I would also like to thank the authors of the videos. One, Sandra, was here in the room, and we have also the others which are with us online. Bioeconomy is driving innovation. I think that was a very strong statement, and we saw a lot of examples of innovation. And what we will try to see is how can we identify synergies between technological innovation and social innovation, including finance. We heard about it. What are the key challenges and innovative opportunities in using wood and renewable material? Also there, Duncan gave us a lot of examples. And what data exist and what data are needed to support innovation and sustainable or green economic growth. Morgana, you said getting the narrative on the ground. That's what we are trying, and to push forward with innovation. So we also got some comments from the chat, but I would like first to open the floor also here. If anyone of you in the room has a question to one of our panelists, please raise your hand and come to the microphones. The microphones are on. I will start. You can think about some questions with a chat question actually we got to Heidi. Heidi, the question was, to what extent do the innovations mentioned by the American Forest and Paper Association consider the social needs of those who work for American forestry companies. What is the social impact of these innovations? Can you respond to this?
Sven, thank you for sharing that very important question, and thank you to the person who asked it. So I would start from a place of just observing that social needs can mean very different things for very different places around the world, right? So it's different by culture, it's different by place. But so I'm going to kind of focus in from the United States perspective on a recent example through the association related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So first, our association starts from, and our industry starts from a place of value for people. People are the most important resource that we have in our industry. So we start from an integrity standpoint of people. And then we also take that value of people and we extend it to the community. Our companies are absolutely integral with the communities in which we operate. And so again, there's a value of the communities. And so as events were kind of getting obviously quite active in the United States, at AFNPA, through conversations with our board of directors, we felt that there was an authentic need for us to create a set of principles for our industry to reflect our view on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we actually facilitated through the association a conversation around around principles for diversity, equity, and inclusion through the association, and the board approved principles. You can find them on our website. They were approved a year ago. And I would also add that those principles, because they were passed at a time that we were in the process of updating our new sustainability goals that I mentioned, the Better Practices, Better Planet 2030 program, we updated our awards program to reflect the new goals. And we included a new award for the diversity, equity, and inclusion area. And I'm excited to say that applications for this new award program end May 6th. We will announce the winners at our November meeting. And this is going to be a new category for us. And I'm very hopeful that we are going to see a number of innovative programs that our companies are bringing forward there. And again, coming back to what's an authentic role for us at AFNPA, it's really about exchanging member ideas and information. And so again, I think this is going to be an important vehicle for us to catalyze that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Yes, please, there is one question from the floor, please.
Thank you. I'm Danish from University of Chittagong, Bangladesh. I'm really very interested to know the innovation in the forestry sector. So very interestingly, I came here to know that what innovations we have right now. So far, I could understand that in the wood processing industries in the forestry sector has got the most innovation in the world right now. Of course, we have some innovations in digital activities. We have innovations in some other side also. But interestingly, for the wood processing industry, I want to say that, in the Asia-Pacific region, mostly, I can say that Malaysia has improved much in wood processing industries. But, in the other countries of the Asia-Pacific region, or in South Asia, for example, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, they haven't got much improvement in wood processing industries. But my point is, in the international financing, mostly finance come for, forest landscape restoration or some reforestation or some for this kind of activities. But wood processing industry has some important influence for getting the forest healthy. It's very important. Today morning from the Forest Resource Assessment 2022, we have come to know that still deforestation is going in the tropical zone. So, if we can develop or get the innovation in the wood processing industry, I think we can stop the deforestation in the tropical areas. Bangladesh, for example, Bangladesh is in the subtropical zone. We are getting so much investments, foreign investments for forest recreation in Bangladesh, but still we are not getting any, investment in forest processing industries. So every, donor, every, funder, they give the funds for forest recreation. They don't give the fund for developing the forest processing industries. That's pretty important. So my point is, with these innovations in wood processing industries, in digital activities or some other activities, financial innovation is very important. International financial innovation is very important. So could you please shed light a little bit on this issue? Thank you. My question is for all the panels. Thank you.
Very good. No, thank you very much for the question. I will add another question here from the chat, and then maybe first give the floor to James to reflect on this, because it was related to Asia, and then maybe pass on the floor also to Duncan if you would like to complement. So the question from the chat was to James, who presented biological, technological, and financial research and development products. To what extent do these innovations consider the needs of local communities? How are local communities involved in the process of developing a new product or process? So maybe with these two elements in mind, James, could you react to the question from the floor and the reflections we got from the chat?
Sure, I'm glad to do it. So for the biological innovations and how our community is involved with that, I think in many cases they help drive the process, right? So there's the communities, NGOs are working together with researchers or development organizations, and they have already made prioritization for specific species or specific products that are being produced. A good example is teak being produced by farmers and mainly communities in Papua New Guinea. A guy named Tony Page, who's from the University of Sunshine Coast through ACR project. What they've developed is high quality, high value, very productive germplasm of teak is now being produced by these groups and being planted on their own land, being planted on individual farmers' land. So, there's a demand for teak both at the village economy, but also at the national economy. And this is, as I was saying before, the technology is not just with the researchers and the development organizations, but being used by the community. So they're helping inform that decision. It's also being done with sandalwood. So teak is an exotic, sandalwood is an indigenous species. For the financial innovations, the involvement of the communities, maybe at those larger scales for the blended finance at large scale investment, it's private sector and government are combining their financial resources. But then when you also get the development funds involved, or it can be for conservation, that's where it's linked directly to what are, when you have this development contribution to the blended finance, that they make sure that there has to be a process of informed consent with the community. What are the community's priorities, et cetera? So at that level, the communities would be very significantly involved. Another thing I mentioned, so the green bonds, social bonds, climate bonds, again, those are all make sure that it's essential, it's imperative for communities' priorities to be involved. Okay.
Thank you, James.
Back to our friend from Bangladesh. I totally agree with you that, there could be more investment. I worked for a small time in Bangladesh, and certainly the processing industry would not be called cutting edge. I agree. But I think there's a lot of good examples. You mentioned Malaysia, and certainly they are a good example. Malaysia has, they developed a whole rubber wood industry. And, it's amazing. This is a resource that used to be burned, and now there's millions of dollars exported every year. But it's not just Malaysia. I mean, also Vietnam, China, they're integrating digital technologies into their forest industry. They're also linking it back to biological innovations. So they're making sure that they develop germplasm and genetic material that's very specific for certain parts of the country, growing to a specific diameter where it can be processed most efficiently, for the resource use efficiency, which was mentioned earlier by Duncan and some other people. So I think that there's actually a lot of good examples. And then, of course, there's Australia and New Zealand where there's very good examples in the Asia Pacific region. So let me hold it there. Let me stop there because I think there's other people who would also like to provide some input. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So
Duncan, yes, please.
yes, I will briefly also comment to the great question from the floor. So as mentioned, there's some great examples of actually companies like New Forests who have their Australian New Zealand fund, for example, which does include also investment opportunities into downstream manufacturing, such as the Timberlink business, which is sawmilling, new investment into cross-laminated timber in South Australia, biocomposites manufacturing plant in Tasmania, the CLT in South Australia. Also examples within funds to build log peeling facilities, for example, in Laos. So we're seeing opportunities to diversify the investment funds beyond just forest investment, but also actually a certain portion of the funds to be used in downstream processing and valuable end uses for that forest. So it is accepted it's a problem, but I think that we're going to see now a greater development of big business ecosystems around the forest assets and around also the funding mechanisms put in place by companies like New Forests in the future.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Mokena, can you add something maybe from the data perspective or other ideas responding to the two reflections and questions?
Sure. I hope is this mic working? Can you hear me all? Oh, there we go. Fantastic. So I just wanted to respond to the question about innovative finance. I think that is going to be where the bulk of innovation is going to be occurring in the next 4 to 5 years. All that capital that's been allocated at COP26, understanding the difference between carbon insetting, carbon offsetting, carbon credits, moving from voluntary to compulsory markets, also understanding good carbon credits, poor carbon credits, but also understanding how do communities participate in that value chain. So I think to your point, I think I could bet 5 years from now, there's going to be a very, very different financial landscape, particularly in terms of how the global north and the global south interact on the question of carbon compliance, net zero, and so on. I actually think it's going to be far much more significant than physical innovation in terms of machinery or planting methods, etc. So the whole business ecosystem piece, as covered by Duncan, I think that's where actually there's a lot of stuff already happening. In the last 2 years, there's been an explosion of different financial instruments. Insurance companies, which never would have been interested in this sector, are now calling us and saying, how do we participate? So I expect a lot of financial innovation to continue. Over.
To continue. So a lot of innovation will continue, and that means that the next World Forestry Congress, we will have an opportunity to see where we will stand at that point in time. We need to close at this point in time, and I would like to hand over to Eric, please, of our moderator, to officially close the session. Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Sven. I had a number of observations kind of scripted out here, but we are totally out of time, so I'm going to give you the super brief version. So I feel like there was lots of good stuff today. In fact, we probably could have filled an entire day with the content here. And I hope that each of you come away with at least one nugget from the session. For me, a key takeaway is that I can now recycle my pizza boxes, something that my wife and I have argued about in the past, and now I can win. With that little tidbit, I'd like to thank the organizers, the speakers, the panel members, Sven, especially Clara, Lyndall, Ashley, and then all of you that are participating from the audiences for making this session a successful reality. Wish you all the best for the remainder of the conference and stay safe. Bye all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.